I think community is really key, and it's not so much about having 2,000 people on Facebook who are your tick friends, right? It's about having meaningful connections with. Realistically, you only need a handful of really meaningful connections, regular meaningful connections in your life to really tick this community box. But in this day and age, we don't achieve that. We work with people, we get frustrated with people we work with, we feel isolated from them, and often when we feel upset, rather than talking to someone, we go to our phone and we express it through our phone. It's a very different experience in the blue zones, in these communities. It's very, I guess, nurturing in that sense, and it's very everything is tangible in person.
What is up, team? It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Kale Brock, also known as @Kale's Broccoli on Instagram. Kale is an Aussie who is a avid surfer, professional surfer, avid surfer, one of the two, doesn't matter. Good surfer at that. Far better than me, that's for damn sure. But more importantly to this conversation, he's actually executive produced and created independently 2 films. One called The Gut Movie and one called The Longevity Film. 2 incredible movies, documentaries rather, just simply about human health and what our gut microbiome is and how it affects our health, how literally what we put in our body affects every part of our human experience, whether that's our mood, whether that's our physical appearance, whether that's our interaction with others, whether that's our mental health, etc., etc. Absolutely incredible. And the longevity film, where Kale goes and he explores different blue zones. And if you don't know what a blue zone is, it's where there's an abnormal amount of people that live to 100 plus very healthy lives. So he goes and explores these areas and picks up patterns from the local people on how they live such an incredible long life. So very excited to have Kale on the podcast. Kale, thank you very much for coming on. All of the listeners, guys, you're going to get so much fucking value out of this. It's incredible. Please take your gut microbiome seriously. Please take your own health seriously. Please take responsibility for your own health. What we put in us has a huge effect on everything in our human experience. And so if you want to learn more about the Gut Movie or the Longevity Film, we'll link everything in the show notes at thinkspacepodcast.com/Kale Brock. Lots of love. Enjoy the podcast. You. Kale, thank you so much for joining me here on the Think Space podcast. I really appreciate you making the time all the way from Australia. Thank you for showing up. I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, Jossie.
So first off, listen, people are going to see this and they're going to go, all right, Kale Brock, that's got to be a front. And I know you've clarified before, but maybe you could just clarify one more time, because it seems like the health expert having a name like Kale Brock. I don't know.
I know it was a strange little thing that happened, but no, my parents did call me Kale Brock. It's on my birth certificate. This was before kale was trendy, though. This was when it was an up and coming vegetable at that point. So I mean, you don't have to. I'm not a pioneer or anything, Joss, but well.
I mean, your parents are, most definitely.
Yeah, I think so. But it's quite a cruciferous name, because Brock is almost broccoli. So I think that's why I've just sort of owned it and adopted the Instagram handle @Kale's Broccoli.
Nice. Get a little Instagram plug in there. I love it. So Kale, what do you do? When I look at your social media, when I look at everything I find online, I see, okay, this guy's a filmmaker. This guy is a journalist. And I don't want to call you a scientist, but like someone who's really gone down the rabbit holes, if you will. Also an incredible surfer, also a YouTuber. Like, what is your life? How do I make sense of all this? What do you do day to day, and where are your focuses these days?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's been quite colourful since I left school. When I'll go back to where I started. I really got into health and well-being when I was younger, and it came about through actually being challenged with a health condition. I was diagnosed with supraventricular tachycardia. So this is
Wow.
SVT, so a heart condition that would see me experiencing quite intense arrhythmias of the heart. And these would often happen whilst I was playing footy, Australian rules football, or I was surfing. And this one time, it happened when I was surfing and I almost fainted out in the surf.
Oh my gosh.
Not a great situation to be in. So I went to the cardiologist and they hooked me up to a little ECG monitor. I went home with all the batteries and whatnot. I took great pleasure in showing all the girls at school like how that was all connected to my body and all that sort of stuff. And in the end, it came back. I had this funny rhythm at certain times. So I would go into these episodes of arrhythmia. And they said, okay, we know what this is. This is called SVT. The only thing that we can really offer you is called an ablation. And an ablation, for those of you who don't know, is where they wanted to enter my heart through the groin or through under my arm and burn away the sinoatrial node.
Sorry.
So that
Enter your heart through your groin?
Yeah, through the groin or through the underarm, just like a keyhole surgery sort of thing with like a little soldering iron sort of thing.
That's a little bit ironic, I gotta say.
It's a little bit strange, and I said at that time, why are we trying to destroy something that's not working? Why can't we fix it? It just didn't make sense to me. And they said, well, this is the only option we've got. We actually knew someone, a family friend of ours at that point, who had had the procedure done, but it hadn't worked. So he'd had it done like 3 or 4 times and he couldn't really exercise properly. And at that time I was like, well, I'm not stopping surfing. So I'm not going to go down that route. I was vegetarian. I was 16. I was like sitting across from this very knowledgeable cardiologist and I was like, what else have you got for me? Because that doesn't sound right. And I went down a different route. And long story short, I ended up mentoring under a naturopath for about 8 or 9 years, and she was a naturopath of 40 years, and she taught me in a very short amount of time some really basic and fundamental health principles which helped me turn things around. So within about 6 to 18 months I had turned that condition around and now manage it successfully just with diet, lifestyle, and a little bit of supplementation. And that sort of opened up the door to the health realm, and surfing and my sort of other vocations just kind of kept plowing through my life's journey. I went on to become a TV reporter and then obviously a filmmaker, and obviously surfing is sort of taking over at the moment, as I sort of transition away from looking at health and well-being so directly, and perhaps accessing it more through surfing instead.
Very interesting. I love it. So let's break it down right down to the basics. So naturopath, again, natural healing, again, lifestyle, exercise, what you're putting in your body, very, very holistic, very natural ways of approaching these things. What is, when we start to dig a little bit deeper, what is the gut microbiome? For those that have no idea, and that just sounds like a scientific phrase, what is that?
Yeah, the gut microbiome is the makeup, the signature of different bacteria, viruses, parasites, protozoa, and yeast, which live on and inside of you. So the majority of our microbiome is situated in our digestive tract, some up to 2 kilograms worth of microbes. And when we realize how small these guys are and how little they weigh, that's actually quite a lot. In terms of your genetic makeup, they make up around 99% of the genetic material that we could find on and in your human body, whereas we're only left with about 1% we're contributing. So if we think about epigenetics, we think about how our immune system, our neurological system, and our digestive system interact with these microbes. They really are providing this fundamental framework for every single human experience that we have, and biological experience as well as outward experience too, that they are that important. So they do everything from digesting food to training the immune system, to making important neurochemicals, to affecting decision making, to affecting rest and recovery, and all the different things that we're really interested in at the moment across the health sphere. They are at the very root of it. So that was naturally my first starting point as a journalist and moving into the health and wellbeing space, because it was quite fresh back then. We were talking before we started recording about how, I guess, the microbiome, the gut message, is in its infancy over there in Canada, whereas here it's sort of full steam ahead. And this was sort of back maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It was just kicking off, and we had some incredible microbiologists, and we had some gastroenterologists, here doing some incredible work, and I was very lucky to access them and sort of be guided by them and mentored by them and get to interview them for the gut movie, which was pretty cool. It's such a fascinating field, and to be honest, the more I learned, the more I realized how little I knew and how much more there was to know. And how I remember speaking with Professor Thomas Barodi about this, the guy who pioneered fecal microbial transplantations, and I said, how much do we know about the whole gut microbiome story? He said less than 1%.
Crazy.
So it's still a very early science, but it's the indications are there to suggest that it is of the utmost importance. And if we speak about now, like how relevant the immune system is now, when we're, being told to be scared of viruses and all these different things, then it should be at the forefront of the conversation.
Absolutely. And it's incredible to me that it's not. And listen, if I'm having a bad day, the first thing I do is, okay, what did I eat? What did I consume? What did I put in my body? Did I sleep? Right? These types of things, like just super, super basic. I want to change my mood. I change my inputs. It's very, very simple. And I get that the science behind everything is just extensive and not researched yet. But like when we think about it logically, this is one thing I love about science, is when we start to think about things logically, like our intuition is often right? Like are you putting in, good, organic, natural foods? Like eating a carrot that's completely clean versus eating a carrot with a bit of dirt on it. One of those just feels better. And it turns out there's scientific repercussions, of eating a carrot with a little bit of dirt on it, fresh from the garden, and that affects our environments inside of us, which is just absolutely incredible. So, but I'm going too far. So let's just bring it back for a second. So we have these little gut bacteria, and they are the center of our genetic code. Like, who would have known? This is crazy. 99%, and then there's 1% somewhere else. So like, what I'm hearing is that what makes us, what makes me, if I could be so, I don't know, ignorant, would be the microbiome and how my body reacts to the food in it. Is that kind of what you're getting at with the whole 99% of DNA is there?
Yeah, if we looked at the amount of genetic material, so the DNA coding that was present in a human being lying on a bed, we would find of that genetic material, of all the code, the DNA code that we would have to read, only 1% of it is human, and 99% of it would be microbial. Now, if we extended that even further, there's a lot of people in the microbiology space who suggest that the mitochondria, the energy unit, the powerhouse of each human cell, actually originated from a microbe itself and could almost be considered a microbe itself. Now, if we flip that on its head, then we're all bug. We're totally bug. So it does become a bit of an interesting thought experiment. Where did this all start, and how heavy of an influence do the actions of these different microbes? And they're not just bacteria. That's a common mistake that a lot of people make. It's bacteria, viruses, parasites, protozoa, and yeast. They make up this population of the microbiome, and they are all interacting in this beautiful symphony of expansion and contraction. You take out one slice of the pizza, then the other ones will come and fill up that space. It's very sort of codependent upon how we eat, how we behave. But if we go back, like, where does this start? How heavy of an influence does this have? It goes back to pre-birth. It goes back to the womb. Where previously there was this thought that the womb is a very sterile environment, but it turns out that it's not quite. There's actually microbes present in the amniotic fluid around the baby, the infant, before it's even born. And those microbes are going in, and they're actually having an impact on how the baby develops. Presumably. And then, of course, we hear about this a lot. How the baby is born has a drastic influence on the type of microbiome that baby will then go on to develop. So if we obviously undergo a C-section, our baby is going to have a very different microbiome through a vaginal birth. And that's because mum's microbiome is pretty much flushed into the vaginal canal, and that's where the baby wants to pass through to pick up all these seedling microbes to actually get things started, to seed its own microbiome. Because presumably, if we sort of apply this in a natural primal setting, mum is out in a typical geographical area. She's eating certain foods, she's combating certain viruses, and her immune system and her microbiome would be a reflection of that. So she's got great systems in place to suit that given ecology. And nature, in its incredible wisdom, says, okay, well, we want to pass on that knowledge, that immune system knowledge, to the child. So it does that through the vaginal birth. Now, of course, C-sections can be necessary as well. We do overdo them, statistically speaking. The World Health Organization, in Australia anyway, says that any country with a C-section rate over about 12% is overdoing it, because there's no corresponding benefit after 12% in life expectancy or infant survivability at birth. We have to consider then what are the implications of that and how can we counteract that. And that's where I guess the process called seeding is starting to become a lot more popular, where the vaginal fluid is sort of soaked up in a bit of a cloth, and that's wiped over baby, put in its mouth, and we're sort of re-mimicking that process if we can. So there's a lot of thought and consideration given to the microbiome in those early years, and typically the infant's microbiome will fluctuate quite drastically for the first 3 years of life. It's only when they start really finding a more consistent dietary pattern and reach that age that their microbiome tends to become a little bit more set. So that can be beneficial in certain ways, because if you're trying to change a child's microbiome, perhaps they've got some neurodevelopmental issues, and we can go into this as you saw in the Gut movie with Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride. You could change the microbiome very rapidly in those first few years of life, just by tweaking the diet, tweaking the chemicals present, and the environment in general. After that, it becomes a lot more harder, and that's why we as adults tend to have a little bit of a challenge with changing things in our health. It can take us 3 to 6 months to 6 years to really get those big impact changes to our health and well-being. But in those kids, you can get it really early, to the point where someone like Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride, who's a neurologist out of Russia but lives in the UK, is regularly reversing autistic-like behavior and autism in these young children, if they work with her program early enough. So it's a pretty fascinating thing with huge implications as to how we actually engage with each other and the world. Because when I think about it as a microcosm of what's going on out here. I'm looking out at the trees, the soil. The soil is the Earth's microbiome, and when we destroy the soil, we destroy the plants, and they obviously can't nourish us properly. So it's this very there's a lot of crossover between what happens ecologically out in the world and what happens in our gut. And I truly think that how we are currently treating the world is quite an apt reflection of how we're treating our microbiomes.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other discussion in itself. But I love what you said there, how the dirt is really the Earth's microbiome. That's incredible, right? So it seems like there's, when we look at nature, there's a harmony, right? When we look at larger ecosystems, everything is affecting everything else, and everything plays off of each other. It's developed that way for thousands and tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. This is very beautiful in nature. And it seems as if now we've developed to this place where we're very unnatural in how we live. And that's causing these things like autism, and it's causing these things like cancer. A lot of people don't know, for instance, just the simple fact that we all have cancerous cells in our bodies. And whether or not our body is able to consistently fight them is going to be the determinant of whether we get cancer or not. So it's kind of, when you reframe it that way and go, well, we're actually born with this thing. It's our job to keep healthy, right? It's our job to, maintain that immune system and maintain, cells that will run that self-destruct mechanism and all these different types of things. When we reframe it that way and we kind of take responsibility on ourselves for our own health and for the world around us, and we really acknowledge the interconnectivity of everything, I think we're able to push a lot further. And I think that's a lot of kind of what you've done in your films, whether that's the longevity film or the gut movie. It's very, very apparent that I think that's key to your message, and I have to applaud that. But I guess the question that I would have for you is, I look at all these things and we can draw different conclusions from different papers and different points of view and different people that are very studied, like yourself, on the topic. When I look at myself as someone who lives in a city, lives in Vancouver, in North America, and we all live in Western cities, I look at it and I go, well, what's the problem? How do we do this right? I'm from a very small island originally. I was a home birth. I was nursed until I was, an older infant, and I look at that and I go, okay, I think there's some elements of doing it right there. And I look at myself as a young adult and I go, I don't know how to treat my gut microbiome in a way that's responsible, in a way that is most healthy. I don't know what I'm doing wrong here. So to really actually give you a real question is, what do you think the problem is when it pertains to how we treat our gut microbiome?
I think it's all to do with expectations. We have unrealistic expectations of our microbiome because we expect that it'll do. There's no right or wrong here. It's only we expect it to do the desirable thing for us in response to incorrect stimuli. It's like it's like trying to expect grass to grow by pouring by weeing on the grass, by pouring urine on the grass. It doesn't happen. What happens is you get a big yellow patch of grass. It doesn't grow. Right. So this is what we're doing to our microbiome. It will react accordingly to the stimuli that you give it. So if you apply a whole foods diet that it comes from healthy soils, comes from soils that are also rich microbially, perhaps you're adding in fermented foods, perhaps you're just consuming a whole foods diet that is very varied and colorful, then you can expect your microbiome to reflect that quite accurately and say, hey, okay, well, we'll give you lots of butyrate, which happens to be anti-inflammatory and anti-cancerous. And we'll work on the immune system. We'll speak with the immune system and turn off inflammatory pathways and protect the gut epithelium, the gut lining. To expect it to do anything different is unscientific for a start, but it's also a little bit. It's also it's ludicrous. It's insanity, right? Because it responds and reacts to what we give it, and it's not just diet. It's how we think. It's how we move. The environment we're exposed to, and all those sorts of things. If we look at what is wrong with, I guess, a more domesticated form of living as human beings, and you could argue whether that is just another stage of evolution or whatever. But what is inherently difficult about that situation in the microbiome is the lack of diversity. We are not exposed to the same number of bacteria and the same variety of bacteria. I say bacteria generally, I mean microbes, that we used to be exposed to. So when we walked through the forest, back in, I guess, more primal days, or you can do this now. This is why I think surfing is such a good thing for the microbiome. You're exposed to the ocean, which tends to carry a lot of microbes as well. I think it gives us an immune boost, not only mentally, but also it gives us, if you will, this form of microbial immunization that is very specific. It's geographically specific and dependent. So the best example of this is in the Yanomami tribe in the Amazon. They consume a certain a truckload of carbohydrates, right? Which we, like in this day and age, would be like, well, they're not keto. Yeah. They must die early, right? They must have diabetes. All this sort of different thing. But what happens is that this tribe actually have a parasite in their digestive tract. Pretty much all of the tribe have this specific parasite specific to the area, which is passed on generationally throughout the generations, which helps them digest that excessive load of carbohydrates. That's just one example. That there are, we could talk about H. pylori. Martin, I think I'm going to get his name wrong, but there's a professor at NYU who was studying H. pylori and the fact that we slew ourselves with so many antibiotics for so many years that we actually wiped out H. pylori from the human digestive tract pretty much, because we thought it was responsible for stomach ulcers, and it is, but only in really high doses. Now, if we manage its numbers through suppressing it with probiotic bacteria, then it actually becomes a well-functioning and beneficial microbe that shuts off excessive hunger and can also contribute to proper immunity. So that's the way we have to look at it. Instead of saying this is good, this is bad, we actually need to go, well, hey, what sort of results do we want? We can actually tweak what we're doing to get that desired outcome. We just have to be perhaps a little bit more strategic and specific. But regardless of what you do, the microbiome will react accordingly.
Got it. Yeah, totally. It makes so much sense. I love when you say domesticated humans, and you go, well, let's not call one thing wrong and one thing right. I'm like, well, domesticated humans sounds wrong to me, but we'll leave it at that. So why is it, for instance, when this conversation starts to come up with people, they kind of go, oh, yeah, it's important. But it doesn't register. Like, one of my, I guess, qualms with how, the international community maybe and just public figures in general that are kind of aware of these type of things have handled this information and this research is that they've kind of taken the approach of, I know it's important, but my lifestyle and my diet and the actual actions that I would take to show the importance of it, that I would actually go through and really put my best foot forward in trying to fix or I would say encourage a more healthy, optimize. Yeah, thank you. Optimize your gut. They don't take those steps. So how is it for you as a researcher, as a journalist, as a filmmaker? How do you help spread the importance of your gut microbiome? Because I can sit here and say to a person beside me, hey, it's everything. It's quite literally everything. And they go, yeah, I know. And the importance won't land. How do you make that importance land with people?
Yeah, it's the age-old question, really. And often, sadly, it takes the death of a loved one. It takes the diagnosis of a serious condition like me. I wouldn't have taken my health and well-being seriously and connected it to food and lifestyle and started looking at the microbiome if it wasn't for my heart condition when I was 16. I was blessed enough to actually get it at 16 very early.
Right.
So I think it's difficult. I think it's very clear that we've lost touch with an innate and biologically appropriate way of living.
Wow, biologically appropriate way of living. That, my friend, is a quote and a half. Sorry.
Thank you. I think we've moved well past that. So it's about now. And myself included, I live in a house. I'm in part domesticated. It's very hard to domesticate surfers, by the way, but in part I'm somewhat domesticated, and I don't particularly have the inclination to go out and rewild myself, and go hunting regularly for all my food and grow all of my food. I think growing food is excellent, but there's no way right now, given my current lifestyle and my priorities, which are more creative, that I could effectively rewild myself. So it's like, how do I then create a balm or create a framework to prop up some optimal biology? So if we talk about, the microbiome, then it's just committing to as much of an organic approach as possible, because I want my soil to be good, because that's going to affect the microbial and the nutritional composition of the food. And I also want to commit to a colorful and broad range of food. So if I go, and again, this is what we see in sort of new age health and well-being, if I say I'm going to restrict a macronutrient group, let's say I'm going to eliminate totally all carbohydrates, then my microbiome is going to go in a certain direction. You could argue all day whether that's good or bad. It comes down to the individual, really, and how much damage they've done in the past and their goals and all that sort of stuff. But for me, I want a broad, diverse microbiome, which means I need to have a broad, diverse plate of food throughout the day. And I choose to get that from the whole foods realm. So I like to work within the whole foods realm, and then anything outside of that I know is going to have generally a detrimental impact on the microbiome. So if we start going towards, your processed foods, or even your more like your health foods or health alternatives, like your erythritols and xylitols and all these sugar alcohols and stevia alcohols and all these different replacements and stuff, they generally hurt the microbiome in that they reduce diversity and kill off certain good species. That's why people get gassy and whatnot after having those things. So I like to stick to a natural sort of approach, what is, again, biologically appropriate. And for me, that's whole foods, as organic as possible, with a wide variety of colors and flavors, and from all different kingdoms. So lots of plants for me, some animals, and some mushrooms, and then I think that's about it.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. How do you tell if your microbiome has been damaged? Because listeners are listening to this right now and go, okay, great. But where am I? Where am I on the spectrum? How do I know? What are some of the side effects? Like, one of my things is I think that most humans kind of always operate on an average, in a generalistic term, average at, maybe operating at 60%, and don't really know what 100% feels like. And so for someone listening to this, go, okay, well, great. There's this microbiome thing. It's really important. It affects everything. And I need to eat whole foods, diverse whole foods to encourage it and cultivate it more. But how do I know where I'm at?
I think if you haven't had to think about your microbiome, you're probably doing pretty well. That's a good sort of yardstick to put out there. If you have any sort of health condition, then you need to at least consider your microbiome. There are, of course, going to be health conditions that are have their origins in your environment, in your stress levels, in all these different things. But most health conditions have at their root at least one fundamental part in the microbiome. So we do need to consider that. Again, that can be a long-lasting mental health condition such as depression. It could be anxiety. It could be allergies. It could be asthma. It could be eczema. It could be psoriasis. It's a whole bunch, a slew of different health conditions, which are all sort of tied back to the microbiome. So again, if you don't have to worry about your health too much, and you feel pretty good, and you generally don't really think about anything to do with your health and well-being, you're probably actually doing pretty well. But if you've been forced to take a pause, which a lot of us are forced to, especially as we approach, I guess I'm approaching 30, but then as you start to approach 40, 50, and all the rest of it, that's when you start, you get the numbers and you get the call to actually say, hey, pause and reflect. What are you doing? Ideally, we don't get to that point, but for a lot of people, we distract ourselves with busyness or a lack of priorities, as I like to call it, but which I fall into as well a lot of the time. That we only get that knock on the door quite late. So I guess if you've ever had to think about your health and well-being, then it's definitely a good time to at least sort of assess where your microbiome's at. And how do you do that? First thing, the cheapest way to do it is to look at your poo. And you don't need to look too close,
We all
but you
do.
can just turn around and look at the quality of your poo. Like, are you doing good poos, or are they inconsistent? Are they
What's a
terrible
good
quality? Does it
poo?
look like someone is? What's a good poo? Exactly. Well, if it looks like someone has attacked the toilet bowl, then it's probably not a good poo. If it looks like it's a soft, loamy, nice poo, it felt good. You release some endorphins when you do a good poo.
Hey.
Then that's great. And those are the majority of the poos that you do. You're probably doing pretty well. Now, if you've got some underlying stuff going on, like, hey, I went to a lot of people in Australia. I went to Bali. I came back. And I've never been the same since digestively. I felt off. Turns out a lot of these people get a parasite over there, so they need to have it checked, and they can do a microbiome test for that, where they send off their poo to a lab, a microbiologist who will look at it, or a molecular geneticist, like the lady I worked with in the Gut movie, to look at what's there and see what's going on in the microbiome. So they might need to take a herbal sort of antiparasitic approach, or depending on who they see, they might have an antibiotic or something like that. So there's a whole different sort of multi-pronged direction that you can take. But where to start, it's on your plate, because your microbiome changes very rapidly. It'll change within the space of 24 to 48 hours. So
Whoa.
if you send off your test, and you're sending off your test in a week, and you go, shit, I need to be healthy for the next week because I don't want it to come back saying bad things, then you're going to skew that test. And then once it comes back healthy, you go, oh, all that I'm sweet, so I'm going to get back on the beers and the Mars bars and the burgers and all these different things. So what we need to think about is long term. This is a long term game. What you do, I would rather you be 80% perfect for the rest of your life, as opposed to 100% perfect for 12 weeks when it comes to the microbiome. This is incredibly important to think about. It's a long-term game. It constantly adapts. You can't just fix it and then let it go and it'll be fine. You've got to constantly nourish it, protect it, look after it, and in return, it'll serve you well.
Got it. Okay. So if there's a pre-existing health condition, you should check your microbiome out, because it's probably a part of the puzzle, if not the issue itself. And a lot of us don't get that opportunity to, or don't get forced to reorganize our priorities because, we don't have the health scare. Now, with us and a lot of our audience, like, they're go-getters, they're people that are very proactive in nature. They're people that are like, okay, I don't have a health scare. I have not had a health scare, but I want to be proactive. I want to live to 100, 150, or whatever it may be. I want to do everything I can in my 20s, 30s, 40s to make sure that I have a healthy gut microbiome, or just healthy body in general. So in that situation, what are some of the tells, for instance, that we say, okay, I'm living okay, my mind and my body are okay, and I think they're generally doing pretty good. I've never even considered this thing called the microbiome, and I want to check in on it. Are there any just basic indicators that can help us figure out if we're on the right track, kind of?
Yeah, I think, as I said,
Besides healthy poo, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, checking out the poos is always a good start.
Nice.
And then just how you feel. How do you feel? Like, do you feel a 10 out of 10 every day? Or do you feel a 10 out of 10 up until about 11 o'clock in the morning, and then it's just a gradual decline for the rest of the day? That could also be what you're choosing to eat for breakfast. But it could be a bunch of different indicators, signs that will show how your microbiome is doing, and a lot of it has to do with thought process and what goes on mentally as well. I know that there was a study done that showed when they implanted a certain parasite in a mouse from a cat, so they took typically a feline parasite, right, and they implanted it into a mouse, which is typically rather afraid of a cat. And what happened was the parasite actually flipped the mice's behavior, and thus the mice then became affectionate towards the cats in this study. So there's drastic changes in thought process and decision making, right?
Oh my God.
Huge implications. It should be spoken about quite a lot. Imagine if all our politicians had excellent microbiomes going into work every single day. What a change we would see. So, it really does have far-reaching implications, and there are numerous warning signs that we can pick up on. But largely, I would say, neurological system, immune system, and digestive system. In those areas, are you dealing with anything? If so, look at the microbiome.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Now, the activist in me just has to ask, where it's like, okay, great. Kale, we have this knowledge. You and your team and your crew and your fanship, they have this knowledge. You've bestowed it upon them. Incredible. Now, we have the bigger problem, which is how do we affect societal change? How do we actually get the world acting and feeling better with a healthy internal system? What needs to happen in order for that to occur, in order for us to maybe take a step back from how domesticated we've been? How do we do that?
I mean, it's a big question. And I think, honestly, it comes down to conversations. I think that the more that we can get people aware and then talking about things such as the microbiome and such as the very basics of human health, such as, movement, community, nutrition and mindset, when we can get these conversations happening, then a change will occur, because it really, I think, does come down to an awareness. I mean, it's easy to sit here and chat with someone who's well versed in health and well-being, but if you and I went into certain parts of Australia, and certain parts of Sydney even, and certain parts of, I'm sure, Canada, people are not having these same conversations.
No,
it's
sir.
not, no way. It's well off the table, and this would sound like woo-woo, conspiracy theory, who are you, what are you talking about? So it's really, it's making this, it's making well-being, and it's making, it's creating a new normal. Right now, it's normal in Australia, for 50% of our children to have a chronic health condition. Right now, it's normal for 99% of the Aussie kids in this country to not eat the government-recommended amount of vegetables daily. 99%. This is a government-funded study. So we need to change. We need to change those norms, because right now we have a direct correlation between our actions and the results that we're getting. Right now, the results that we're getting are pretty average. People are dying early. They're spending their last 10 years on this planet bouncing in and out of doctors' offices and hospitals. And generally, it's just not a good thing. It's the blurred line between whether they're dying from an illness or the medications that they're being given. It's absolutely crazy. So if we can get these conversations happening, remove the taboo around, criticizing science. By the way, when science is no longer able to be criticized, it's no longer science, it's religion. Okay, we need to have these discussions. So I think that those are the biggest hurdles. And unfortunately, we have vested interests in place to keep the status quo. We know that big pharmaceutical companies influence legislation and political decisions at a federal level, at a global level. We know that. It's very obvious, especially during this time. So it's very important for us to actually break apart those systems, those conglomerates, by talking about it. And not being scared to talk about it. I can't believe how passive the population has been during this time. So I really think that we need to, build up that fire again and become more active and become more expressive and really speak our thoughts without fear of being judged or criticized, and actually being open to dissertation back and forth over opposing beliefs without going, well, you disagree with me, so I hate you. It really has to be just a mature approach, but I think that is idealistic in a way. How does that happen in the real world? I think it happens through just discussions, conversations, and more of them occurring. Right now, it's shifting. I can see it shifting. There's been a big backlash, I think, from this whole coronavirus saga on the big influencers of the world who are trying to achieve certain things out of this. And I think it's been really cool to see. And I know, like, even in the surfing space, at the top echelon of this sport, people are talking about this stuff, and that's happening across the various industries of the world. So if we can really encourage that and foment that, I think that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, ferment that. I absolutely love that. I mean, what you're saying, 99% of kids not eating, enough, government recommended vegetables, and who cares who recommended it? It's just like, eat plants, man.
Yeah.
Or 50% of kids, dealing with a serious health condition. That's insane. And it's so devastating, especially for us in Canada, because we look at you Aussies and we're like, they got it figured out. That's Narnia over there. They're like, we're like, come on, how could anything wrong be happening over there? Anyways, but it leads me to my next question, which is around exactly that, is around the coronavirus. And I know a lot of people have had a lot of different, conversations and opinions on this. And, I have a view on it that is probably similar to yours. Maybe I could guess, but I'll hold my view for a second and ask you, how have you, as a man in your position, that's entrenched in health, directly or indirectly, how have you taken in what the coronavirus is and how it's going to change our society moving forward?
As I said, I think
was
it's
a big sigh. That was a big sigh right there, sir.
Yeah, I know. I'm feeling very frustrated. at the moment. So next week I was meant to go. I've been invited to go back to the wave pool in Melbourne to shoot a video. And I don't know how abreast of the Australian situation you are, but they've just shut down the entire state of Victoria because there's been, I think, 200 or 300 new cases or something like that. Maybe it's in the thousands or something. This is after, by the way, they've tested people by getting the army to come in and knock on people's doors and force test them for a virus that naturally spreads. This is what viruses do. This is why we say, I want my posts on Instagram to go viral, because they spread, right, like wildfire. So it's exactly. So this is a very real virus for sure. But if we look at the actual statistics and we look at the mortality rates, if I'm being very frank, they're very low. And they've been totally blown out the water for a long time. And the estimates that we've been given have been just incredibly wrong. So I think there is an agenda here, and I think that's coming from a certain I guess a section of the elite, if we want to call that, and without going too esoteric and conspiracy theory, if we want to name those people,
that's cool. Do you?
They are right there in the headlines. I mean, for all to see, with their smiling little spectacles and their little fingers in all the pies and their patents on certain things that they want to force on everybody in the world. That is what the elite wants us to move towards, is this sort of society where they have a lot more control over us. I mean, you think about it, we pretty much laid down and allowed our governments to put us on house arrest as healthy people to protect potentially a few deaths. When have they ever cared about the health of the elderly before? Because if that was the case, they would totally revamp and restructure nutrition programs in old people's homes. They would give them jobs to do. They would they would never let them retire, but they would let them transition into important, fulfilling, meaningful types of work, because we know that is one of the most important things in keeping people healthy and alive and vibrant. So we know that's not the case. They do not care. This is not about preventing deaths. This is such a joke that they've even said that. So I think it is all about controlling and setting a very dangerous precedent on how much they can intervene in our lives. And I think it's very responsible of us as humans, if you are equally as outraged by this, to stand up and say no, F off. Because we sometimes in our lives we need to do that. I'm not that sort of person. I want to be left alone and to go surfing and do my stuff, to do my creative stuff, but unfortunately right now that's not happening. I'm having to actually stand up and fight for my rights, which is, I thought that, these times were over, and our generations past had done this for us. But it turns out we're probably going to have to take some of that responsibility and do it ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible how it's been mismarketed and the messaging has just been so construed in terms of the importance, right? I mean, I tell you, actually, what is it now? Maybe 2 weeks ago, I was out and about, and I saw a man with a mask, and I saw a man with that man in a park. I think I was going for a run, and he pulled the mask down to take a smoke, and then he put the mask back up. And me being the precarious little shit that I am, I pulled up my phone and I took a video, and he got very mad, and so. I tried to de-escalate the situation. He said, delete the video, da 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 da. And I was just like, okay, I respect your privacy, but do you understand like how atrocious and ironic what you're doing is? Like you're in a park with a mask while smoking a cigarette. Like, do we not understand this is about our immune system? This is about like keeping generally healthy. Like I have had from the start this very like, how I've fought this, me personally, is just like tripling down on my immunity, right? That's it. Like I haven't disrupted this is not a popular opinion, but like I have not disrupted my life at all.
Good,
not even a
neither.
tiny bit. And I have no shame in saying that. Like I've done everything I can to try to educate people around me. And one of the things, Kale, that I just always makes my kind of alert go off is that whenever I see anything like this really pushed from fear, driven by fear. This is fear mongering at its best. And I think that we can fight fear mongering with hope. I think that we can fight fear mongering with education. And it's part of the big reason why I think having you on the podcast right now is so paramount, because it's literally, that is the true antibody. This is actually the true cure, is to double down on your own systems. Even if you don't know that it's been broken, even if the status quo is broken, even if the status quo is not vibrant and immune, how can we, take that and educate our people so they can be healthier and they can stand up to a government or stand up to a military or stand up to whoever and go, hey, I'm good and I don't need to shelter in place. What I need to do is help others and help educate others so we can live more vibrant lives. But as soon as anything comes from fear, I'm good. I typically question that a little bit.
Yeah, and I would agree. And it's been amazing how looking at it objectively, how well orchestrated this has been across the world, and how far-reaching these certain individuals, these certain families, these certain groups are. And there's a big war going on. But it's being waged secretly, and one side is misinformation and Facebook fake news, and the other side is government edicts, and I think it was Richard Nixon who said the scariest thing that you can hear is I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And I think this particular time has been very reflective of that sentiment.
Spoken like a true capitalist.
Yes.
I agree. It's just I'm not to get too political, but it's just my immediate family, I am God near a Marxist. Like I believe in equal distribution. In my tribe, I'm a socialist, and with my town, I'm a socialist. And as I go further and further out, I become more of a capitalist, right? And I think that's kind of how we should organize our societies. And I'm not the person to even know. And I'm not the person.
I think Michael Pollan says that, doesn't he? He says, your community, be a socialist and I think that's brilliant.
I think it's absolutely incredible. I'm glad that you remembered who that was from, because I sure didn't. But I think it's him. Yeah. Michael Pollan has a lot of good quotes. Yeah. So we'll give it to him. He deserves it anyways. So I absolutely hear you. Absolutely hear you there. I'd be really curious to know from your perspective, how do you think this time, with the shelter in place, with our lack of diversity, with our lack of exposure to different bacteria, our lack of exposure to good foods, how do you think this is going to affect the health of our population?
Well, I mean, we've already seen the implications of it with diagnosis of mental health conditions is skyrocketing during this time, which is when you take away people's purpose, when you take away their community, when you take away their movement, when you take away their mindset, it's just, what do you expect? That those are fundamental pillars of human health that we need to appreciate. To take them away with the excuse that you're taking them away to protect them from a virus, to protect their health and well-being, it's rather bizarre. So I think the implications will be far-reaching, and they'll be spread over time. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was sharing the other day some stuff on his Instagram talking about unemployment, and for in America, that is, for every 1% that the unemployment rate goes up, they can expect 44,000 people to die.
Incredible.
So during this time, like, how much has the unemployment rate gone up? Like, how many more people are dying from a result of
25% in some places? It's insane.
Exactly. So insane amounts of people perishing from, again, a preventable list of factors in the name of something else. So I think it is going to be far-reaching, and again, as much as it's easy to just blame the government, I think now more than ever we need to take responsibility for those things. It's like, okay, if I'm not allowed to travel to Melbourne next week to go to the wave pool, it's like, okay, in perspective, not that bad. That's okay. I can go eventually again. So what do I do then? To acknowledge and look after that factor, which is probably surfing, movement, creative, blah blah blah. I can do that at home. I can replace that. I can substitute that. So it's really about getting a little bit creative with your own lifestyle and starting to prop up those areas that have been currently impacted by the given situation, and really looking after yourself. A good thing that's come out of this, I think, is how it's almost been like that trigger that we talked about before when
Right.
people get that diagnosis, right? It's like, okay, no, you've got to pause and reflect. What makes you happy? What makes you healthy? Like, why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you spending 5 or 6 days at the office a week when your family's at home? And that's not a bad or good thing. Again, it comes down to your priorities and what you want to achieve. So I think this pause and reflect time has actually been pretty beneficial.
Yeah, forced reflection, right? I mean, we're
Yeah.
very, very distracted, and I think that plays into our health and our longevity as well, which actually brings me to my next point, which is I'm very curious in how, yeah, sure, coronavirus, and yeah, sure, the gut microbiome, and yeah, sure, these other things, but I'm very curious how we, on a broad base, with these new threats and the new information, from the health perspective, and these new threats from, I guess, a health perspective as well, how that's maybe changing how we're thinking about longevity, which I know is another area, another topic that you've dedicated a lot of your life to. How are these two things, the advancement in health and now the advancement in a global pandemic, really playing into and factoring into this concept of longevity?
Yeah, this comes from, I guess, my work looking at the blue zones, which can be attributed to National Geographic and the Blue Zone Project. So they basically found 5 hotspots around the world with a high concentration of centenarians and a very low concentration of dis-ease. So I was lucky enough for my film, the longevity film, to go and visit Ikaria in Greece, Loma Linda in California, which is a Seventh-day Adventist community, which is bizarre,
Just
right?
crazy.
And
Still can't believe
it's
that.
crazy. And Okinawa in Japan. So I was able to go and visit these people to see what they're doing for health and well-being, and going into it with that typically a more micro mindset. When I was doing the gut movie, it was all micro, right? Like microscope, microbiome. What are we looking at? But actually being forced to zoom out a lot for the longevity film and look at what these cultures are doing more broadly, more fundamentally. And we sort of isolated that into 4 main things: that it's the nutrition, it's the movement, it's the community, and it's the mindset. Those things are really at the root, provide those pillars that we base the rest of our health and well-being on. If we it's almost like the microbiome, those essential elements of what makes up a desirable or optimum human experience, and that is aging up until 95 to 100 and then dying in your sleep without getting sick. I think that's pretty desirable for most people. So that's what a lot of these communities were achieving, and it was a pretty incredible experience. So I think, again, looking at how the current situation has impacted us, are we sacrificing those pillars in order to prop up another, or do we just actually come back and look at things, zoom out again, and take stock of where our life is at in those different areas, and try to actually balance them out? Because there's no point sitting alone in the corner drinking your green smoothie, being upset, never exercising, and having a shitty attitude, whilst your friends are over at the bar having a beer, but they exercise every day, they communicate with each other, and they eat great food. It's like we need to actually look at this realistically and with a grain of salt. These people aren't fasting. They might every now and then. These people aren't. And again, I'm not disregarding these interventions. They work very well. They're not fasting regularly. They're not keto. They're not paleo. They're not vegan. They just eat this whole foods, natural sort of diet. They have work that they consider very important, and they do a lot of it. They don't just sit around all day doing nothing. They converse with each other. They have strong family ties. They have strong community ties. And they just really live a very happy and blissful existence, and this can be achieved in the middle of California, of all places. It's pretty incredible.
So you said, just to reiterate, throughout your film, you said that the pillars are nutrition, community, your mental state, and activity. Was it?
Community, nutrition, movement, and mindset.
Worded far better than I did. So within those pillars, like, what do you see the most under attack right now? As we're all probably working from home, and we're not getting out, and most of us aren't farming, and most of us aren't going out to multiple food sources. We're eating from one food source, and all these different things. Like, our life has just changed so much, and a lot of our listeners, again, their lives have changed so much. What would you, with your expertise, actually recommend people pay the most attention to when it comes to having the objective of living a long, fulfilled life? What's most important for us to go, hey, I need to do something about this?
I mean, it's super hard to attribute importance allocations to, but I think based on how I came back from the experience, what I saw most tangibly was a lack of community, particularly within this modern day and age and of social media and Zoom calls. This is brilliant in that it's enabling us to chat across the globe, right? But when it's used as a replacement for in-person interaction, or when we send a text, we react neurologically very different to when we make a phone call or see someone face to face. It makes a significant difference in our neurochemistry, and then in the flood of emotions that we experience and biology that we then express. So I think community is really key, and it's not so much about having 2,000 people on Facebook who are your tick friends, right? It's about having meaningful connections with. Realistically, you only need a handful of really meaningful connections, regular meaningful connections in your life to really tick this community box. But in this day and age, we don't achieve that. We work with people, we get frustrated with people we work with, we feel isolated from them. And often when we feel upset, rather than talking to someone, we go to our phone and we express it through our phone. It's a very different experience in the blue zones, in these communities. It's very, nurturing in that sense, and it's very everything is tangible in person. It's there are habits in place, community rituals, community expectations that have built into them inherently well-being. It's like Yoshiko, the lady who I was hanging out with in Okinawa, the 93-year-old who's very funny. She sings 3 or 4 times a week. She teaches kindergarten. She grows her own food. She looks after some of her neighbors. She's a big pillar of the community. She hosts her own radio show and podcast. Like, it's crazy. She's 93 years old. So her days, her schedule is busy. But within that, she finds her movement. She's walking up and down stairs all the time. She's when she's singing, she's standing up, she's hopping up and down. When she goes to karaoke, when she goes to the community meetings, she's ticking off that community box. When her mindset is obviously clearly going to be very positive and resilient with that sort of a schedule. And obviously, and her nutrition is also very good as well, because she comes from Okinawa and there is a community expectation that you eat lots of whole foods, a lot from the ocean, lots of seaweed and stuff like that. So there are a myriad of examples that I that I got to experience and see firsthand, where in these people's lives, well-being is just inherent. They're not actively going, hey, I haven't propped up my community pillar today, I'm going to go and walk down the street and have a chat with people. They just do it. It's just part of their life, So the easier we can make it to adhere to these very basic and very important fundamentals, the longer we're going to live and the more well we're going to live.
So incredible. So you got a chance to go and visit these blue zones. However, now you do not live in a blue zone. You are back in this community that you're in Australia, and it's like, within this, what are the habits or the rituals that you've created? So you have a basic fundamental framework for health and longevity. Now that you have all the knowledge that you have, how have you just put in the framework so they're not boxes that you have to tick every day? Things like, again, the community, the health, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I look at you and I'm like, oh, well, this is a guy that's probably got a huge network and probably is very, very busy and probably doesn't get a lot of one-on-one time. Like, these types of things, these are just assumptions that I make that could be very far from the truth. But how do you create a framework for longevity in your life when you don't live in a place that inherently has that framework?
The power is in daily rituals. Daily rituals, you put those in place, you don't have to think about it. Habits, if we want to call them habits. For us, it was moving house. So we lived in a place where we were one suburb over from most of our friends, and we'd just moved to Sydney. So being that one suburb over, it's this extra disconnect that was it was definitely having an impact on how often we saw people, how familiar we were with them. So it was like, okay, we're going to move. So we moved into the community right in the center of the community up in where I live, where we can walk everywhere. So all of a sudden we're walking everywhere, which means we're bumping into people left, right, and center down the street. So, and then what happens then? We spark up a conversation, and all of a sudden you see, just on your way to the organic store, 5 people who are part of a community who you have a really meaningful interaction with, that make you feel even better. And we're also, what are we getting? We're walking there. We're walking everywhere. We're 150 meters from the beach, from the surf beach. So walking everywhere. So I'm getting movement in. I'm obviously surfing. I'm also seeing people out in the surf regularly, the same faces all the time. So we're having conversations out there. So your nutrition's being looked after, because we have farmers markets. We have an organic store. That's pretty easy for me at this point. That becomes a habit. Once we feed our microbiome will crave those foods after a time, which helps us then stay on track. Community, we're getting that because we're surrounded by people, we're walking everywhere, we're embedded in the town. Movement, we're getting that again because we're walking everywhere, because we're surfing every single day. And the mindset that comes out of that is, that had to change quite a lot, because I was so busy. I was making that film, almost broke me, like financially, socially. Like it was an incredibly stressful experience, because we did so well with the Gut movie. It was like, do I just pocket that money and save it or whatever? Or do I put it to another film? So we invested it in another film. So it was quite a stressful experience, spending, upwards of whatever it was, close to $200,000 on the second film. So that was like, okay, why am I doing this? Do I need to do this? So it was just stepping back, and sort of what happened was, in regards to the mindset, it was slowing down a lot, and taking pause and finding moments throughout the day that were previously annoying, and using them as anchors to come back and take a breath. And if you look at how the people in these blue zones live, they don't meditate every day, but they live very meditatively. They're very conscious, they're very considerate, they're very calm. And they take that considered approach and they apply it to all these different areas of life. And I think it really anchors them and guides them through in a very healthy way.
Beautiful. No, I love it. I mean, and that's the goal, man. At least that's the goal for me. Live close to your friends and see them often, and be able to walk to the place where you get your food, and be able to walk to the place where you get your exercise, and these different types of things, or bike or something like that. What's the goal? The goal is happiness, right? What's linked to happiness the most? Health, and community, and these different types of things. So, I think it's of the utmost importance. And again, I applaud you for the work you do. So I have to ask you, when is the next film coming? Is there a next film coming? What's going on, Kale?
Well, part of the resolutions that came out of all this was to never self-fund another film again. So that is something we'll rely on. Perhaps the government forcing as they're dishing out money as compensation for house arrest. So yeah, we'll start working on that. We're working on a TV series at the moment, turning my kids' gut health book into an animated series. So going fictional enterprise, which will be really fun. And then there's a whole slew of other projects that are sort of just sitting there waiting for the right situation to brew.
Incredible. And in the meantime, you're hitting every surf break that you possibly can.
Yeah, I am. And just chucking it all on YouTube.
Of course. So thank you so much for your time, Kale. I really, really appreciate it. I think it's very educational for absolutely everybody involved, and including me. And it's always great to hear this right from the horse's mouth, and to reiterate these things and remind ourselves of these things, even if we don't, even if we know them, to really double down and can we take information and make it knowledge through the power of conversation. And that's really the goal here, and I think that's something we've definitely achieved. So, Kale, thank you for your time, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And it's been nice to just have a conversation, hasn't it? Like just to chew the fat and get this stuff out there. I mean, again, people might disagree with us and they might whatever, but as long as we can have these conversations and still make it constructive, I think we've won the day.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So where would you like to direct people? Where we'll put all the links in the bio on the webpage. We'll put we'll link the fuck out of everything. But where would you like to particularly send people if they'd like to get in contact with you or consume some of your content? Where do we point people?
Look, I'm on socials at Kale's Broccoli. The longevity film is on iTunes. The gut movie's on Vimeo or Gaia. They can watch it anywhere. So just there's fine. Perhaps we'll bump into each other in person one day and have a meaningful interaction there as opposed to over the phone.
I'd love that. Listen, we got some mutual friends. I got to get my butt over to Australia ASAP here.
Yeah,
absolutely. So Kale, thank you so much for the time, and we'll make sure to send everybody your way. And I'm looking forward to the next book, fictional, whatever piece of creative endeavor you go on. I know it'll be great.
Thanks, brother.
All right, thanks, Kale. Not bad at all. I know it is not bad at all. Kale, thank you again for your time. Guys, I cannot stress again going out and checking and purchasing and supporting an independent filmmaker. Again, the Gut movie and the Longevity film, two incredible films, documentaries that I've watched myself, and I think that those messages are something that's going to help us in every aspect of our life. These things can be super scientific and hard to get into, but we just need to break down the stigma of taking care of yourself, watching what you put in your body, and how that's going to affect the quality of your life and the quality of the lives of the people around you, which is the most important thing. So if you guys do go and rent or download or buy the either one of the films, please do holler at me. Let's have a conversation. You can just get at my DMs or shoot me an email. My contact is everywhere. So I'd love to continue the conversation, try to break down that stigma because, again, there's nothing uncool about taking care of your health. And sure, it can be a little bit awkward at first. Okay, how's my microbiome doing? Well, you got to turn around, look at your poo. All right, cool. But we need to break the stigma down around these things because it's going to increase the quality of our lives. And that is the most important thing. So thank you, Kale, for spreading that message. And we'll do what we can to spread that same message as well. Until next week, everyone, I hope you have an incredible week. I hope you stay healthy, happy, and work on your longevity and continue to build the habits and the rituals to live a long and healthy life. That's what it's all about. Peace, love, and I'll see you guys next week.